The tension is clearly resulting in real changes, because those stats I read out at the start, where there's more nations in conflict now, there's more military funding, more people think we're on the verge of something pretty catastrophic than any time in the last couple of decades. That information, which is causing attention, is then having a downstream impact, which is conflict is breaking out.
I'd also say it's upstream. You have polarization happening within societies, especially in Western societies, where there is no monopoly on the truth or news or information. You have the fragmentation of, let's say, major news sources. Traditionally, you have a few very respected, trusted sources and authorities or figureheads that people would turn to. We don't have that anymore. It's now been diluted to the point that it is almost meaningless. And so you see that social media has contributed to this. And so with that, these divisions, these schisms in society have made major industrial powers like the United States, like let's say the Europeans, more vulnerable to manipulation than ever before. So now if you're an adversary like Russia or China, Iran, North Korea, you can take advantage of the ability to tap into this polarization and play people off against one another, cause division. And that destabilizes democratic societies. And then that in turn enables these countries like Russia and China and others to have more leverage and more influence in the developing world. In the past, it was whoever had the strongest military. Now, you don't necessarily need the strongest military to do it. You just need to have the strongest information army and the willingness to do the dirty things that Western societies don't do anymore, but they used to.
I want to interrupt because I think there's an order of operations here that we're getting at that isn't clear. I would argue that ignorance starts the foundation for the polarization that is then capitalized on through this information warfare landscape. So I say that because I think it's important for us to understand that your statistics are relevant and correct. Those statistics don't come first, they come after. The ignorance kind of comes first, the willing blindness to what's happening in the world. The willingness to just focus in on what your tasks are or what entertains you and let the rest of the world kind of do whatever it's going to do. It's that choice first that then leads to other countries finding an opportunity to manipulate the masses that are no longer informed as to what's happening outside of their world. I don't want to speak for you, but that's kind of how CIA handles clandestine operations when it comes to information security operations, is understanding we're not trying to make an audience ignorant, we're finding an ignorant audience and then giving them messaging to get them to take action.
The difference is, so I would maintain, we've always been ignorant. The difference is now you can actually do something with that ignorance and manipulate it at scale that you couldn't before. So ignorance has always been with us, but before at least people knew where they could go to find what they perceived to be a trusted source. So now that source is gone, that messaging is gone.
That skill is gone.
I have a different take entirely, and I focus on narrative. So I'm really interested in who tells the story and who gets to control the story. And what I watch happening a lot is that the story is controlled for a while and then it gets hijacked over and it's someone else's story. So it's like the end of the spectrum of what you're both saying, and you have the agency working really hard to grab it back. You've got the White House saying, we need to get our stakeholder press, and it's this, so you're running essentially like a kinetic war, a proxy war, and an information war at the same time. And I think that the information is what drives most of this conflict, which is why it's so interesting to me to speak to diplomats, the only people not at this table, right, that are like, because then that's only where I see the hope of kind of like take it down, because there's an ease that needs to happen when you can move the people from trust to paranoia.
I love that you mentioned diplomacy and diplomats. So I teach courses on diplomacy, and one of the things I've seen emerge in the last few years is this dichotomy between private diplomacy, which is what we were used to when we studied the Cold War and post-Cold War conflicts, and now we have public diplomacy. Almost all diplomacy, take the Iran-Israel war, the 12-day war, as Trump calls it. How much of that war was conducted via social media? This is now, so you have this public-facing diplomacy where you have, during wartime, leaders, their representatives, their proxies, conveying messaging both to their enemies, to their allies, and to a supposedly neutral audience, all through social media, right? So it is not so much the nuclear age, but the age of the algorithm and how that amplifies diplomacy in a way that never, ever existed. And so this is, I think, this lends to that dilution that then others can take advantage of. Because at the end of the day, if you want to threaten a country or you want to garner support, how you articulate that via social media, whether you use all caps, whether you use images, memes, all of these things play into how effective that is. And you see that most on TikTok, and when after the October 2023 Hamas attacks against Israel, the information warfare between the two sides and how it played out on college campuses. I was at a big one where a lot of that was taking place at UCLA, and how that played out on social media, and even among high school kids who I talk to, and their understanding of conflict is now shaped by what TikTok, which is partially controlled by the Chinese government, feeds them and chooses to feed them and amplify.
So here's a specific example which might be helpful to what you're saying. With the 12-day war recently, I think the White House wanted that to just be a bombing run. You can correct me if I'm wrong. Just a bombing run. We're gonna go, we're so power. It was about power, it was about precision, take it out. And it was the press that wrote, "America enters the war."
Yeah.
And that is a major headline. And that probably made the White House deeply upset because they don't want to be seen as entering into a war. And so I think another real problem we have right now with all of this tension ratcheting up is how angry, and I'm just talking about America now, the political sides are at one another. That to my eye, because I'm an apolitical writer, no one has any idea what my politics are. I write about war and weapons neutrally. But I can observe, and it seems to me like the different warring political parties inside the United States are so intent on taking down the other side. They do it, from my eye, at the national security peril. In other words, a headline against Trump is better for them than U.S. national security or world security. I'm curious what you think.
Well, I think we're all saying something that's derivations of the same thing, versions of the same thing, right? There's a massive information warfare landscape happening, and it is that fog of war that we look through that gives us that tension about what's actually happening at the ground level. If you think about conflict as being what humans will do to each other, there's layers on top of that that create this distortion of what you can expect. And there's so much activity in the information landscape that it's very distorted what could actually happen. We have a term at CIA, and when we talk about covert influence, activities to shape information, we talk about volume and speed, which gets right back to your point about TikTok and social media. We've always engaged in information warfare, but the volume and the speed was much less and much slower because you had to fly fucking pamphlets and drop them out of airplanes and hope that the people reading it were reading the right dialect of Arabic or Spanish. You had to hope. And then once there was a rainstorm, all of your pamphlets are done. And if you're trying to make it look like they're not coming from America, there's all sorts of other layers to that. Well, now an algorithm that you don't even control is contributing to that. And then you've got creators, content creators all over the place that have no added value to the content they're creating, who are just clipping, cutting, and putting things together and then further being amplified, right? So the volume of information is massive, and the speed at which it disseminates is huge, and the algorithm can dictate whether you see it or don't see it at all. So while I appreciate your point of view, that there's this tension and there's this growing concern, I honestly think that your opinion on that is because you're informed and intelligent. And there are huge groups of people who are completely oblivious to where we actually are on a sliding scale of approaching conflict.
Where are we?
I think that's what we're really here to discuss. I would argue that we are not entering a phase of less conflict. We are going to enter a phase 5 to 10 years of more conflict, increasing conflict, a willingness to engage in more kinetic conflict, to use your term. I don't think that we're showing the various global power competitors of the world that it will not be tolerated. I think we're showing the global power competitors of the world that violence, kinetic attacks, cyber warfare, weapons development is going to be accepted.
My wish is that America could overcome her tribal anger, that a lot of Americans have toward one another that are in different political parties. Because I feel like America is a leader in terms of security and safety, or can be and should be. And that all of this amplification of the rhetoric is deeply dividing. the fancy word is divisive, but it's just dividing. And that if there's any place that one's enemies or adversaries, or call them what you will, can take advantage of that, it is right there.
Is that wishful thinking?
For me to say, I am a very wishful thinking person. I mean, I write about the grimmest, darkest subjects imaginable, with a smile on my face, because I just am naturally, I'm naturally optimistic. I'm the mother of two, college-age boys. Of course I'm going to be optimistic.
Andrew was just saying that he thinks there's going to be more conflict going forward. We have 9 nations now that have these nuclear weapons that some might argue creates stability, but some might argue that it only takes one individual. And you said there's 6 nations hosting those nuclear weapons. I don't know, sometimes I think, gosh, you only need one miscommunication or one mistake from one person who is, I don't know, not doing too well mentally or having a bad day. That's kind of how I think about it. And I'm like, probabilistically, if you just stretch it out, some point that's going to happen. Some point that's going to happen.
Well, you're absolutely right. And that is why, it'll be interesting if we maybe talk about Iran just from the, specifics about what happened and, why is or is not important. Because just having looked at nuclear weapons so microscopically recently, I believe that existential threat, the global catastrophic risk of a nuclear, of a flame that starts that movement toward a nuclear use, is a sort of line that must never be crossed. And so while all war is terrible, there is always a solution on the other side of the war. Peace can be made, but not with nuclear. And so that, I look at things right now through that lens, which is how I saw the most recent bombing.
You mentioned, Andrew, talked about Israel and Iran being a proxy war, so that kind of piqued my interest. I almost reflexively want to disagree, but I want to hear more about why you think so I can better understand proxy conflict from that angle.
Yeah, well, the way I see it, Israel is ratcheting up its aggression against proxies that Iran has been using to threaten it for decades.
Right.
But Israel is also dependent on American weapons to do that. It's also dependent on American intelligence to do that. It's dependent on American support financially and economically. So it needs America to wage its conflict moving forward. If America were to say, Israel, we don't support you, then Israel would take a different approach without a doubt. So the funding, the support, the intelligence flow, the economic support coming from the United States is what empowers Israel to prosecute its conflict. Without that support, Israel would take a different approach to the conflict.
But then proxy would imply that Israel's acting as an agent or at the behest of the United States. So the United States, rather than getting involved directly with Iran up until last week, operates through another entity.
That's the misunderstanding about proxy war. You're looking first for some sort of conflict that already exists. The conflict between Israel and Iran already exists. The proxy then, the proxy relationship happens when an outsider, a third party, comes in and exacerbates the conflict by putting more fuel on an existing fire. It's not that Israel is the agent of the United States. It's that Israel already wants to prosecute some sort of conflict. We come in and we're essentially the fuel to help exacerbate that fire.
So who's the proxy in this conflict?
Israel.
Okay.
Israel's the proxy for the United States, who wants to diminish Iran in the same way that Israel wants to diminish Iran. This specific conflict is so fascinating because every fucking buddy wants Israel to degrade Iran. Saudi Arabia wants that. The United States wants that. All of the European Union wants that. Israel wants that. Everybody wants to see a degraded Iran. So Israel, especially after what it's been doing in Gaza and the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, Israel's desperate for anything it can do to win back favor for the Abraham Accords, as a democratic country, you name it. It's looking for an option, and Iran is a very convenient option for them to build back relationships that they've killed along with the attacks in Gaza.
If the reasons are different, does that still make one a proxy of the other? So Israel's objections to Iran, and it's the reason it sees Iran as a adversary, might differ from the United States. And there's a Venn diagram, there's some overlap, but there's also a tremendous amount that doesn't overlap.
Right.
Same thing with the Saudis, the Gulf states, other regional states that see Iran as a threat. They see it for different reasons. Does that still, and I'm not saying you're wrong, I'm just trying to understand, does that still make them a proxy if their motives are different?
I would say yes, because it's not about the parts of the Venn diagram that don't overlap. It's about the parts that do. It's about the convenience of Israeli citizens dying, Israeli soldiers dying, Israeli weapons being spent. That's the benefit of a proxy conflict. It's not American citizens who are at risk. It's not American soldiers who are dying. It's not American weapons that are being spent. We get to build our surplus. And if anything, we get to build extra and sell it to Israel, which is benefiting our economy. So this is the uncomfortable truth behind proxy war, is it's all the benefits of a wartime environment without any of the risks.
But then what also happens, and you can look at Vietnam as a great example, is the proxy wars that are supposed to be low cost for the United States end up blowing up into being a disaster for the United States.
So I think of Vietnam, I think classic proxy war,
Yes.
right? Right. Khrushchev gave that speech, I think 1963, whenever it was, about wars of national liberation, and that they would be fought in what was then called the Third World. Vietnam being a classic case. There I see absolutely, right? First you had the French, in French Indochina, and then the United States bailing the French out. Arguably, the French were maybe a proxy for US interests. They were part of that firewall that were keeping the dominoes from falling. But again, I'm trying to understand the Israel-United States proxy angle here. And that's a unique definition of proxy, I guess. Okay, so
I'll give you an example.
go ahead.
I'm going to butt in with an example. And
Yeah.
you tell me if this is right or wrong.
Yeah.
So in a weird way, the Iraq War was a proxy war for the same reason.
The Iraq War,
We
the,
were trying-
the 2000, which the
George
2000
Bush and Dick Cheney's Iraq War.
Right.
We're trying to weaken Iran.
You think the Iraq War was an attempt to weaken Iran?
I mean, you pipe in here, but that's how it started. That was the original intention. And the deep, tragic irony is what we have now, which is Iran is running Iraq.
Why does the United States want to weaken Iran?
The United States
Because of what
wants.
happened to your family in 1979.
But why? But why does it? What's the beef the U.S. has with Iran? I
Because they
I
had
know
our
that's
hostages for 400 and something days in 1979, and we will not let that go until that is,
How is that? What does justice look like?
I'm not saying that's.
Yeah.
I'm
No,
just
but I'm saying
that's,
why are we at war with Iran, or not at war, but why are we at conflict with Iran?
I mean, I think there's a lot of different valid answers for that.
Mm-hmm.
But where I would take this, especially to keep it really accessible to the layperson, right, is that the United States wants zero competition for being the single superpower in the world. It wants no competition for that. It wants to remain the single superpower everywhere, because being the single superpower gives your civilians, gives your population security, but it also means that you have the lion's share of all the resources in the world. And basic economics teaches us that all economics is based on resources. So Iran's goals to create a Shia state, to create a Shia crescent of power and influence across the Middle East, is in stark contrast to what would benefit the United States. What the United States wants is to maintain a Sunni majority, because that's where the oil is coming from, is majoritively for United States, Sunni, wealthy, Khaliji states.
Even though Iran's the second largest.
Not for the United States.
Yeah, not for the United States.
But it was, right? During the United States' greatest period of prosperity, it was a bipolar world. So unipolarity is something we've had since the 90s onward. And yes, there's been tremendous success. But arguably, unipolarity has been destabilizing,
What's unipolarity?
where you have one world power basically dominating, which has kind of been the case since the end of the Cold War. And now we've seen a rise of other sort of poles, maybe with China being one. But you had, during the entirety of the Cold War, it was a bipolar structure. You had the Soviets, you had the US. And they were dictating everything else on the chessboard that was the globe, right, in front of us. And arguably, since the end of the Cold War, the unipolar system has not been very stable. You could say that, I think the stats you cited, the number of conflicts have almost increased since that time. What's the takeaway from that? What do you guys think?
I mean, this is where I think academics and reality butt heads.
Okay.
Because academically, I agree with you.
Okay.
And on principle, I agree with you.
Okay.
The world could be better if it was multipolar. If we had a strong Europe and we had a strong country in China and we had a country in Asia and we had a strong United States, and if we could find a way to cooperate effectively and collaborate without conflict, I mean, academically, all of that sounds wonderful.
Oh, I don't pretend that it's going to be friendly or cooperative. I think you can have multipolar where you still have adversaries.
Yeah.
But the idea is that you're saying that countries seek to be unipolar. They seek to be global hegemons because that gives them what?
No, countries don't do that. Once you are a near-peer competitor, then you have no other option in the reality of it except to be the most powerful. This is why there's only one Olympic gold winner for any competition, for any specific Olympics. You can't have a tie. right? It's the reason why if there is a game that ends in a tie, it goes into overtime because you have to have a winner. That's like, it's human nature. I have to know what my threat level is against you. So one of us has to be dominant and one of us has to not be, as it has to be second to our dominance. And we can have dominance in different areas, right? That's why when I'm a guest in your home, I follow your rules. When you're a guest in my home, you follow my rules. There's an element of that that's all just built into our DNA as human beings. But what the United States has is it has global hegemony. It has all the benefits of the world's wealthiest economy, the strongest currency, the lead on technology. We've diversified our workforce so that we don't have to rely on manufacturing. We literally make money off of ideas in the United States, whereas a place like China is doomed to try to have human beings who do things with their fingers to make money. So when you have that level of power, you become very focused on keeping that power. Talk to any wealthy person out there and they'll tell you the same thing.
But war is a zero-sum game. The Olympics are a zero-sum game. Diplomacy implies that others can win. Not everyone can win equally, but multiple winners can emerge or multiple losers can emerge. We can all kind of share a spot in the podium. Two people can stand in the gold section. You can split it. You can have a team sport, right, where everyone's getting gold on that team if they win. How is that consistent with what?
Culture. This is where culture starts to lay in.
Yeah.
And I would say that the United States is a zero-sum culture.
I would say too.
Okay.
If you love the Diary of a CEO brand and you watch this channel, please do me a huge favor. Become part of the 15% of the viewers on this channel that have hit the subscribe button. It helps us tremendously, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests.